I can still taste the recaf they served us that morning, burnt, metallic, wrong. 3 months into my assignment with Inquisitorial Cohort 17, and I'd learned that wrong tastes meant someone was about to die. I didn't know it would be me, not in any way that mattered. The summons came during morning devotions. A servo skull with cracked eye lenses hovered at my shoulder, whispering coordinates in a voice that sounded like grinding teeth. I was to report to Sub-Level Gamma of the detention complex immediately. No reason given. Inquisitors don't explain themselves to junior notaries, especially not fresh transfers from the Administratum's record-keeping divisions. I'd requested the position thinking it would give my clerical work meaning, purpose beyond endless data slate entries about grain tithes and population adjustments. I wanted to serve something greater than numbers. The detention complex smelled wrong too. Not the expected reek of unwashed bodies or waste, something sweeter, like spoiled fruit mixed with burned hair. The scent clung to my nostrils, thick enough to make me breathe through my mouth as I descended the iron stairs. Each level took me deeper into the Hive City's foundation, past the nominal civilization of the upper tiers into the honeycombed darkness, where interrogation chambers outnumbered holding cells 3 to 1. My escort didn't speak. Guardians, the Inquisition's household troops, never did unless ordered. This one wore grey carapace armor marked with devotional script I couldn't read, letters that seemed to writhe when I looked at them too long. Her face was hidden behind a featureless mask, but I could hear her breathing through the rebreather, measured, mechanical, utterly calm. I tried to match that calm. Failed. Sub-level Gamma held 73 cells. I'd processed the intake manifests myself just 2 weeks prior. Political dissidents, suspected heretics, civilians who'd failed genetic purity screenings, a handful of off-world merchants who'd made unfavorable remarks about Imperial efficiency. Standard detainees. The kind of people the Inquisition processed in bulk, sorted and judged and disappeared with the procedural coldness I'd found oddly comforting in my first weeks. It meant the system worked. It meant someone was watching. The Guardian stopped at cell 47 and keyed the lock with a touch code I wasn't cleared to see. The door ground open on corroded hinges, revealing a chamber barely large enough for 2 people. Inside, a man sat shackled to an iron chair. He looked ordinary, mid-40s, standard years, thinning hair, clerk's calluses on his fingers, the kind of face that blurred into any crowd. He stared at the floor, lips moving in silent counting. "Notary Vess," the Guardian said, her voice flat through the rebreather. "You are to witness testimony and confirm identity against archive records. The detainee is Clerk Tertiary Morlan, Division of Tithe Assessments, Subsector Administration. He has made claims requiring verification." I nodded, pulling out my data slate with fingers that wanted to shake. Standard procedure. I was good at standard procedure. Morlan didn't look up when I entered, didn't react when the Guardian sealed the door behind us, leaving us alone in the cell's septic yellow light. The sweet rot smell was stronger here, coating my tongue until I could taste it in my saliva. "Clerk Tertiary Morlan?" My voice sounded small, swallowed by the walls. "I need to confirm your service record and review your testimony for documentation purposes." He kept counting. I could hear him now, whispering numbers in a steady rhythm. 471, 472, 473. His eyes never left the floor. I consulted my slate, reading his details aloud as protocol demanded. Born in the Factorum districts, 37 years Imperial service, exemplary efficiency ratings, 3 commendations for exceeding tithe quota projections, a model functionary. Nothing in his record suggested why the Inquisition would detain him, let alone require witness verification from someone of my negligible rank. "The charges against you," I said, scrolling through the detention order, "are listed as ideological contamination and mimetic infection. Can you explain?" 498, Morlan interrupted, still not looking at me. 499, 500. He took a shuddering breath, and when he looked up, his eyes were red-rimmed but terribly, terribly clear. That's how many people I've watched them disappear, 500 exactly. I started counting after they took my supervisor for asking why grain shipment records didn't match population consumption data. That was 4 years ago. The cell suddenly felt smaller. I glanced at the door, but the Guardian had sealed it from outside. Standard procedure for testimony collection, I told myself. Nothing unusual. Your supervisor was charged with asking questions, Morland said. His voice was soft, almost gentle, with noticing discrepancies, with being too good at his job. He leaned forward as much as his restraints allowed, and I saw bruises flowering purple-black along his throat. You smell it, don't you, the sweet smell? I did. God Emperor forgive me, I did, and I'd been trying not to think about what it meant. They don't use standard execution methods here, Morland continued, that terrible gentleness never wavering. Too quick, too clean, the Inquisition prefers thoroughness. They take you apart slowly, cataloging every piece, making sure nothing remains that could carry the taint they've decided you carry. But here's what I learned, Notary Vess. In my 4 years of counting, everyone carries taint. Everyone has something that can be found if someone looks hard enough, and they're always looking. My data slate trembled in my hands. I'm only here to verify that I existed, he finished, that I was real before they unmake me. You're not a witness, Notary, you're an accomplice. They make you watch so you'll understand this could be you. This will be you eventually, because everyone fails their purity eventually. Everyone asks one wrong question or notices one wrong thing, or simply lives too long in proximity to what we do here. The sweet smell seemed to pulse with my heartbeat. I realized it was coming from the walls themselves, seeping through hairline cracks in the plascrete. How many interrogation chambers shared ventilation with this cell? How many people had been rendered down to component elements in rooms just meters away, their biological matter atomized into mist that the recycling systems couldn't fully filter? I was breathing the dead. I stood, nearly dropping my slate. I need to complete the documentation. Your identity is confirmed. Your testimony will be recorded. 501, Morland said as I hammered on the door. You should start counting too, Notary. It helps, knowing the number. Makes it feel less endless. The Guardian released me without comment, resealing the cell with mechanical efficiency. I wanted to run, but running in inquisitorial facilities attracted attention. I walked with measured steps, breathing through my mouth, trying not to taste the air, trying not to think about what I just witnessed, what I just participated in. I made it back to my quarters and vomited into the recycler. Then I sat on my cot and stared at my data slate, at the blinking cursor waiting for me to file my report. Detainee identity confirmed. Testimony recorded. Mental state unstable. Recommendation: proceed with standard protocols. Standard protocols. I'd filed that recommendation 47 times in my 3 months with the cohort. 47 people I'd confirmed existed before they were erased. I hadn't counted before. Hadn't wanted to think of them as a number, as a tally growing towards some inevitable sum. I filed the report. What else could I do? The next morning the recaf tasted wrong again. I drank it anyway. They promoted me 6 days later. Senior Notary, with expanded access to detention records and interrogation scheduling. The Inquisitor herself, a woman whose face I'd glimpsed only twice, angular and cold as a knife edge, summoned me to her chambers to deliver the news. She stood behind a desk of polished bone, her red-trimmed robes absorbing the light rather than reflecting it. You show appropriate discretion, she said, not looking up from the document she was signing in blood-red ink. Notary Vess, you understand the necessity of our work? Yes, ma'am. The words came automatically drilled into me by 3 months of careful observation and fearful compliance. Do you? Now she looked at me, and her eyes were colorless like deep ice. Many who come to serve the Inquisition believe they understand. They arrive idealistic, certain of their righteousness, confident in their ability to distinguish purity from corruption. They fail to grasp the fundamental truth. Corruption is not exceptional. It is the default state of humanity. Purity is the aberration, the impossible standard against which all must be measured and found wanting. The room's temperature seemed to drop. I couldn't feel my fingers. We do not protect humanity by destroying its enemies, the Inquisitor continued. We protect humanity by destroying humanity itself, constantly, eternally, culling the infected tissue before it can spread. The enemy without Xenos, heretics, worse things, they are obvious, manageable. The true threat is internal, the question asked, the doubt entertained, the moment of compassion that stays the righteous hand. Do you understand this, notary? Yes, ma'am. No. She set down her pen with careful precision. But you will. Your expanded duties begin immediately. You will witness interrogations directly now, not merely document their outcomes. You will learn to see corruption in its nascent forms. You will learn to identify those who must be purged before they themselves know they are tainted. This is the burden we carry, Notary Vess. This is the duty that elevates us above the masses we protect. She dismissed me with a gesture. I fled, there's no other word for it, back to my quarters, where I discovered my personal effects had been moved to a larger room 1 level deeper in the facility, closer to the detention complex, closer to the work. That night, I dreamed of counting. In the dream, I stood in an endless corridor lined with cells, and from each one came a voice whispering numbers, different voices, different languages, but the same ascending count. I walked the corridor trying to find its end, but there were always more cells, more voices, more numbers spiraling upward toward infinity. I woke tasting sweetness on my tongue. The interrogations began the following afternoon. Guardian Commander Krail, a massive figure whose augmetic replacements outnumbered his original limbs, escorted me to Chamber 8 on sub-level Epsilon. The chamber was larger than the cells, outfitted with equipment whose purposes I couldn't immediately identify. Didn't want to identify. The detainee was a woman, maybe 30, restraints biting deep enough into her wrists to draw blood. She sobbed when we entered, pleading in a dialect I didn't recognize. The interrogator, a tech priest whose robes concealed more machinery than flesh, didn't acknowledge her pleas. He simply activated his tools, and the woman's pleas became screams, and I stood against the wall with my data slate recording every word, every accusation extracted, every confession torn loose from her throat. She'd been denounced by her husband, had expressed doubt about the efficacy of daily devotions after their child died during a medical servitor's routine procedure, had questioned in private whether the God Emperor truly watched over individual citizens, or whether such promises were convenient fictions to maintain compliance. Ideological contamination, mimetic infection, insufficient faith. The interrogation lasted 4 hours. By the end, the woman couldn't speak anymore, could only make wet gasping sounds through a ruined throat. The tech priest logged her confession, given after the first hour, repeated under various stimuli to confirm authenticity, and marked her for processing. Your observations, Notary? Guardian Commander Krell's voice rumbled like grinding stone. I swallowed bile. Confession obtained. Taint confirmed. Recommend standard protocols. Insufficient. Krell stepped closer, and I could smell the sacred oils that lubricated his augmetics, sweet and cloying, like the smell from the cells. You are not here to simply transcribe. The Inquisitor wants your assessment. Could this corruption have spread? Did the detainee infect others with her doubt? I looked at the woman strapped to the chair, at the ruin they'd made of her, at the Guardian standing impassive by the door, at the tech priest already preparing his tools for the next subject, at the data slate in my trembling hands. Her husband, I heard myself say. He denounced her, which suggests he retained his faith, but he was exposed to her heresy for... The records indicate they'd been married 11 years. It's possible he concealed his own infection to avoid detection. Recommend investigation. The words tasted like ash, like betrayal, like the sweet smoke of burning flesh that I couldn't escape no matter how many times I scrubbed my skin raw. Better, Krell rumbled. Fear makes you careful, careful makes you useful. Proceed to Chamber 12. We have 7 more interrogations scheduled before evening devotions. 7 more. 7 more people pulled apart, 7 more confessions extracted, 7 more recommendations I would make to save myself by damning others. The woman in the chair had stopped moving entirely. I couldn't tell if she was unconscious or dead. I couldn't let myself care. Chamber 12 held a man who'd failed to report his neighbor for possessing pre-imperial literature. Chamber 15 held the neighbor himself, along with 3 generations of his family, because corruption, they explained, was hereditary. Chamber 9 held a factor foreman accused of inefficiency, though his real crime, whispered during his breaking, was refusing to falsify production reports to meet impossible quotas. By the 6th interrogation, I no longer flinched at the screams. By the 7th, I was suggesting additional lines of questioning, identifying potential co-conspirators from the detainees' desperate babbling, helping the interrogators be more efficient in their extractions. Helping. That's the word I used in my own mind. I was helping maintain order, helping protect the Imperium, helping identify corruption before it metastasized. The alternative, acknowledging what I was actually doing, would have been unbearable. Guardian Commander Krell commended my work that evening. The Inquisitor herself sent a message of approval via Servo Skull. I was given increased rations, better quarters, a new data slate with expanded access to the detention facility's archives. Rewards for service, recognition for efficiency. That night I started counting. Not 500 like Morlun. Not yet. But 47 from before, plus the 7 from today, plus the woman's husband who I'd marked for investigation, plus however many family members and associates would be swept up in the expanding net of suspicion that always grew wider once it began. 56. 57 if you included Morlun himself, who'd been processed 3 days after I'd witnessed his testimony. I'd filed the confirmation report myself, noting that his remains had been properly rendered and recycled per standard protocols. His hydroponics contribution would feed 73 citizens over the next month cycle. Even in death we serve. I lay in my expanded quarters, staring at the ceiling, and wondered who was counting me, who had marked my name on their own tally, waiting for the inevitable moment when I would ask the wrong question or notice the wrong discrepancy, or simply become surplus to requirements. Everyone carries taint. Everyone fails their purity eventually. The interrogations continued. Days blurred into weeks. I learned the technical vocabulary of pain, nerve inducers, bone screws, psychic probes, truth serums that worked by dissolving inhibition centers in the brain until subjects babbled every thought they'd ever had. I learned to identify false confessions versus genuine ones. False confessions came too quickly, too cleanly, the subject desperately saying anything to make it stop. Genuine confessions emerged slowly, reluctantly, pulled from the places people hid their real thoughts. I learned that genuine was usually worse, not because the crimes were greater, but because they were so small. Doubts, questions, moments of compassion or confusion or simple human frailty that, under the Inquisition's merciless scrutiny, became evidence of fundamental corruption. I learned that the Guardians weren't enhanced soldiers or fanatics. They were conditioning victims, their personalities chemically and surgically erased and rebuilt as perfect instruments of obedience. The masked Guardian who'd first escorted me had once been a woman named something. Her records were sealed, who'd served in the administratum, who'd perhaps sat at a desk like mine filing reports trying to make sense of senseless systems, who'd failed some test I hadn't yet realized I was taking. 3 months into my new duties, I was summoned again to the Inquisitor's chambers. She stood at a viewport overlooking the Hive City's industrial districts, watching smoke rise from 1,000 forges and manufactorums. "You're adapting well, Notary Vess," she said without turning. "Your efficiency ratings are exemplary. You've identified 17 distinct corruption networks and recommended appropriate containment measures. The cohort's effectiveness has improved measurably since your elevation. Thank you, ma'am. The words were automatic, empty. Tell me, notary, do you dream? The question caught me off guard. Yes, ma'am. Of what? I shouldn't answer, shouldn't reveal anything that might be interpreted as weakness or doubt or insufficient faith. But she'd asked directly, and refusing to answer was itself an answer. Numbers, I said. I dream of counting. She turned then, and something almost like satisfaction crossed her knife-blade face. Good. That means you're understanding. The count is infinite, notary. The work never ends because corruption never ends. Each case we resolve spawns others. Associates, family members, those who witnessed and failed to report, those who reported too slowly or too thoroughly or with insufficient enthusiasm. The networks branch endlessly, and we must follow every branch to its terminus. But if everyone is eventually suspect— Everyone is suspect, she interrupted, her colorless eyes fixing on me. Everyone, including you, including me, including the Lord Inquisitor who commands this sector, and the High Lords who command him. Suspicion is the natural state. Innocence is temporary, a grace period before inevitable failure. Do you understand what this means? I couldn't, but I nodded anyway because disagreeing was suicide. It means we are already damned, she continued, turning back to the viewport. All of us. The moment we joined the Inquisition, the moment we took up this work, we contaminated ourselves with the knowledge of corruption's true scope. We see too much, know too much. Eventually that knowledge will metastasize within us, and we too will require purging. The question is not whether we will fall, but how much good we can accomplish before we do. How many genuine threats we can eliminate before we ourselves must be eliminated. She let that hang in the recycled air, sweet with the taste of 1,000 unnamed dead. You're to be tested, Notary Vess. Tomorrow, you will lead an interrogation personally. No interrogator, no tech priest. Simply you, a detainee, and the tools of our trade. Your performance will determine whether you proceed to full interrogator status, or whether your talents are better suited to other service. The Guardians. Chemical lobotomy and surgical reconstruction. Transformation from person to instrument, from thinking being to obedient weapon. I understand, ma'am. No, she said again, almost kindly. But you will. I spent that night reviewing interrogation techniques, studying the manuals and recorded sessions, trying to prepare for something no amount of study could prepare me for. The detainee's file arrived on my data slate at midnight. Clerk Secondary Hess, Division of Population Registry, 23 years Imperial service, accused of systematic data falsification. I read the charges twice, then 3 times, then checked the evidence logs. Hess had been altering birth and death records, adjusting population figures by tiny amounts, single digits, never enough to trigger automated auditing systems. Over 2 decades, these tiny adjustments had accumulated to a discrepancy of nearly 15,000 citizens who existed in official records but not in physical reality. 15,000 ghost people, drawing rations, occupying housing allotments, registered for labor tithes they never fulfilled. It was, objectively, a serious crime. Resource theft on a massive scale, the kind of inefficiency that could cripple an entire subsector's tithe obligations. It deserved investigation and punishment. But the file noted something else. Hess had been using the ghost citizens to hide actual people. Families who'd fallen through bureaucratic cracks, children born in violation of population quotas, refugees from purged districts who'd somehow survived the cleansing. He'd been giving them the identities of the dead, allowing them to continue existing in a system designed to crush anyone who deviated from proper registration. He'd been saving people, 15,000 people over 20 years, and I was supposed to interrogate him. Extract his confession. Identify everyone he'd hidden so they could be properly processed and eliminated. I vomited again, though my stomach was empty. Dry heaves that left me shaking on the floor of my quarters, tasting copper and that ever-present sweetness that had become the smell of my life. When dawn came, measured by chronometer, not actual sun in the hive's eternal twilight, I reported to Chamber 4. Hess was already restrained, a thin man with grey hair and steady hands despite the bruises flowering across his face. Someone had already worked him over preliminarily, standard procedure to establish psychological vulnerability. The Guardian sealed us in. I stood alone with Hess and a table of instruments I'd seen used but never touched myself. Nerve inducers, bone screws, chemical injectors, a psychic resonance crown that would amplify his pain until it became his entire universe. Clerk Secondary Hess, I said, my voice not quite steady. You are charged with systematic data falsification and resource theft spanning 23 years of service. Do you confess to these charges? Yes. His voice was calm, matter of fact. I confess fully. I falsified records, created ghost citizens, diverted resources. All true, too easy, too quick. False confession trying to end it fast. Why? I asked, though the question wasn't in the protocol. Because the quotas were wrong, Hess said simply. Population reduction edicts demanding 5% annual decrease across all districts, regardless of circumstances. Do you know what that means, Notary? It means culling functional families, productive workers, children who'd done nothing wrong except be born in a year when the numbers required reduction. It means the system eating itself to satisfy quotas that someone in a distant administrative tower decided were necessary without ever seeing the people being erased. My hands were shaking. I gripped the edge of the table, feeling cold metal bite into my palms. That's not your judgment to make. The Administratum's quotas serve the greater imperial need. The Administratum's quotas serve the Administratum, Hess interrupted. They exist to demonstrate efficiency to their superiors, who demonstrate it to their superiors, all the way up to people so distant from actual humanity that we're just numbers in reports. I didn't falsify data to steal, Notary. I falsified it to save. 15,000 people who deserved to live, but whom the system had marked for deletion because their existence was administratively inconvenient. He leaned forward, restraints creaking. You've read my file. You know I'm right. So the question isn't why I did it. The question is whether you're going to torture me for doing what any decent person would have done, or whether you're going to ask yourself why you're serving a system that punishes decency. The chamber was very quiet except for the hum of recycling systems and my own ragged breathing. I looked at the instruments on the table, then at Hess, then at my own hands. Everyone fails their purity eventually. I picked up the nerve inducer. Hess tensed but didn't look away, didn't plead. He'd known this was coming, had known for however long they'd held him before this moment. The device was cold, smooth, designed to fit ergonomically in an interrogator's hand. Point and activate. Simple. I need names, I said quietly. Everyone you helped. Every false identity you created. The Inquisition will hunt them regardless. If you cooperate, their processing will be cleaner, faster, less suffering. No, they'll tear the information from you eventually. You know they will. This is offering you mercy. Mercy would be putting a bolt shell through my brain, Hess said. This is offering me participation in their destruction. I won't do it. I can't stop you from breaking me, Notary, but I won't help you. I activated the nerve inducer. Hess screamed. The sound filled the chamber, bounced off the walls, seemed to crawl inside my skull and nest there. I counted to 5. The manual recommended 5-second pulses for initial psychological conditioning, and released the trigger. Hess slumped in his restraints, gasping. Tears streaked his bruised face. He looked at me with something like pity. You're counting, he whispered. I can see it. You're keeping track of everyone you've helped destroy. How many now? I couldn't answer. My throat had locked shut. The Inquisitor told you everyone fails eventually, Hess continued. words coming in ragged bursts. She's right, but failing doesn't mean becoming what they want you to be. It means refusing to participate, even when participation is the only way to survive. I'm already dead, Notary. I was dead the moment they arrested me. But those 15,000 people, they're alive. They're living in the cracks of the system, being the humans that the Imperium forgot how to value, and you can torture me for 1,000 hours, but I won't give them to you. I raised the inducer again, held it aimed at him. My finger rested on the trigger. How many are you? Hess asked. How many people like you who came to the Inquisition thinking you'd serve something righteous and discovered you're just another tool of oppression? How many of you are counting your victims and telling yourselves you're doing necessary work? The inducer felt heavy, impossibly heavy. I have to, I said, and I was no longer sure if I was explaining to him or to myself. If I don't, they'll make me a guardian. They'll erase me and use what's left. At least this way I'm still what? Hess's voice was gentle, terrible. Still you? Still human? Look around, Notary. Look at where you are. What you're doing, who you're serving, you're already erased. You're already a weapon. The only question is whether there's anything left inside you that objects to what you're being used for. I fired the inducer. 5 seconds. 10. 15. Hess's screams became something beyond sound, a raw animal noise that no throat should produce. When I finally released the trigger, he'd lost consciousness. The Guardian entered at my signal, checked Hess's vitals, administered a stimulant that dragged him back to awareness. I waited until his eyes focused, then did it again. And again, and again. 6 hours. That's how long I tortured Clerk Secondary Hess, using every technique I'd witnessed and studied, pushing him to the edge of death and pulling him back, breaking his body systematically while trying to break his mind. He gave me nothing. No names, no locations, no identification of the 15,000 people he'd saved. When the Guardian Commander finally ordered the session terminated, I stumbled from the chamber with Hess's screams still echoing in my ears. My hands were steady. My stomach was calm. I filed my report with professional precision. Detainee uncooperative. Requires advanced interrogation. Recommends psychic probe under tech priest supervision. Recommend, that word again. My recommendation would kill him. Would kill the 15,000 he protected, because psychic probes broke minds open like fruit and spilled every secret without resistance. My recommendation was complicity, was murder by bureaucratic procedure. I filed it anyway. That night I didn't dream. I lay in darkness staring at nothing and realized I'd crossed some final threshold. I'd become the thing I'd feared. Not a guardian. I still retained my thoughts, my identity, my sense of self, but something worse, a willing participant, a conscious collaborator who understood exactly what she was doing and did it anyway because survival demanded it. The Inquisitor summoned me the next morning and informed me I'd passed the test. I was elevated to interrogator probationary status, granted full access to the detention complex, and expanded authority to mark subjects for investigation. 30% increase in rations, private quarters, a servo skull of my own to carry my data slates and record my observations. I thanked her, accepted the honor, felt nothing. Clerk Secondary Hess died under psychic interrogation 2 days later. The tech priest extracted his secrets, mapped the network of 15,000 hidden people, and forwarded the information to administrative enforcement divisions. The purge took 3 weeks. Entire districts were locked down. Every citizen screened against the falsified registries. Anyone who couldn't be properly authenticated disappeared into detention. 15,000, plus their immediate associates, plus anyone who'd failed to report suspicions, plus enforcement officers deemed insufficiently thorough in their initial screenings. The final count reached 38,000 before the operation was declared complete. I documented every stage of the purge, filed every report, recommended processing for hundreds of detainees whose only crime was existing in the wrong place with the wrong documentation. I was efficient. I was thorough. I was everything the Inquisition valued in its servants. I stopped counting at 500. The numbers became meaningless beyond that threshold, abstracted into pure data. 500 individual human beings I could almost hold in my mind as discrete entities. Beyond that, they became statistics, casualties, necessary sacrifices for the greater good of a system that devoured the same people it claimed to protect. Morlan had been right. 500 was enough to understand the pattern, to see that the work was infinite not because corruption was infinite, but because the Inquisition defined corruption broadly enough to encompass the entire human experience. Questions were corruption, doubt was corruption, compassion was corruption. Failure to achieve impossible standards was corruption. Eventually, existence itself became synonymous with guilt, and the only innocence was in not yet being noticed by the system's merciless eye. 6 months into my service as interrogator probationary, I was assigned to investigate Inquisitorial Cohort 17 itself. Internal review, standard procedure, performed cyclically to ensure the watchers remained watchable. I received a list of 23 personnel marked for scrutiny, guardians who'd hesitated microseconds too long in following orders, tech priests whose devotional observances showed statistical irregularity, support staff whose efficiency had declined by fractions of a percent. The list included my name, not prominently. I was third from the bottom, flagged for review based on elevated stress markers in routine medical screenings and a notation that I'd asked why during an interrogation of Clerk Secondary Hess. A question, a single word that suggested uncertainty about procedure. I stared at my own name in the file, marked for investigation by my own hand, and understood finally what the Inquisitor had meant. We were all already damned. The question was how long we could delay the inevitable. I could purge the notation, adjust my own file the way Hess had adjusted population records, hide the irregularity before it grew into something that couldn't be ignored. But that would be falsification, would be corruption, would be exactly the crime I'd been empowered to investigate in others. Or I could file an honest report noting my own deviation and recommend myself a corrective action, could participate in my own destruction with the same clinical efficiency I'd applied to hundreds of others, could prove my loyalty by demonstrating I understood no one, not even myself, was exempt from scrutiny. Or I could run. The thought arrived fully formed, shocking in its clarity. I could access detention facility schedules, identify gaps in Guardian patrols, forge exit documentation using techniques I'd learned investigating other forgers. I could disappear into the Hive City's depths, become one of the countless unregistered masses living in the spaces between official acknowledgement. I could survive, maybe, if I was careful and lucky, and willing to abandon every shred of the identity I'd built over 32 years of Imperial service. I sat in my private quarters with the investigation file open before me and realized I was already dead. Had been dead since I filed that first recommendation for Clerk Tertiary Morlan. Since I'd participated in my first interrogation. Since I'd crossed the threshold from witness to collaborator and discovered there was no crossing back. Running would just delay the inevitable. Hiding would just make my eventual capture more thorough, my processing more severe. The Inquisition didn't forgive deviation, didn't offer second chances, and I'd seen too much, knew too much about their methods and systems and vulnerabilities. They'd hunt me not because I was particularly dangerous, but because allowing any escape, any suggestion that their reach was less than absolute, would undermine the atmosphere of inevitable doom that was their most effective weapon. I filed an honest report, noted my own irregularity, documented my moment of questioning, recommended myself for corrective psychological evaluation and potential reassignment. The words flowed with practiced ease, each sentence a blade I pressed against my own throat. Then I waited. The summons came 3 hours later, not to interrogation as I'd expected, but to the Inquisitor's chambers. She stood at her viewport as always, watching smoke rise from the forge districts. "Your report is noted, Interrogator Vess," she said without turning. "And approved," I blinked. "Ma'am?" "Self-identification of irregularity is not corruption," she explained. "It is vigilance. It is the ability to apply our standards to oneself without flinching. This is the quality that separates tools from instruments, servants from inquisitors." You asked why during an interrogation, not as challenge but as technique, as method to deepen your understanding of the subject's psychology. And when routine screening flagged this as potential irregularity, you did not attempt concealment. You reported yourself with the same thoroughness you apply to others. She turned then, and for the first time I saw something almost human in her colorless eyes, almost like satisfaction, almost like pride. "You are ready for full interrogator status," she said. "You understand now what many never grasp. We serve not through righteousness but through rigor. We are not pure. Purity is impossible. But we are thorough. We are uncompromising. We apply the same merciless standards to ourselves that we apply to everyone, and in that consistency lies our strength." She extended a data slate containing my new credentials: authority to investigate anyone below Inquisitor rank, access to restricted archives and psychic assessment tools, command of my own interrogation team and detention facility assignment, rewards for betraying myself, promotion for demonstrating. I'd internalized the lesson: everyone is suspect, everyone is eventually guilty, and the only virtue is participating enthusiastically in the endless grinding wheel of suspicion and punishment that keeps the Imperium's machinery functioning. I accepted the credentials, thanked her, felt the weight of my new authority settle across my shoulders like a shroud. "You still count, don't you?" the Inquisitor asked. "I can see it in your eyes. You're maintaining a tally." "Yes, Mom. Stop." The word was sharp, commanding. Counting implies the work can be finished, that some number exists where the duty ends. There is no such number. The work is infinite because corruption is infinite. You could process 1 trillion souls, and there would still be more, always more, because the simple act of living in this universe corrodes everything it touches. Understanding this, accepting this, is the final lesson. She returned to her viewport. "Go, Interrogator Vess. Your new team awaits. 20 Guardians under your direct command, a full sub-level of detention cells, enhanced authority to expand investigations as you deem necessary. You will do good work. You will identify genuine threats and eliminate them. And when your own taint finally surfaces, when the weight of what you've done erodes your resolve and the cracks in your dedication become visible, your successor will process you with the same thoroughness you've shown others. This is the compact we make: service until failure, thoroughness until the end. Accept it, and you become an instrument of divine justice. Reject it, and you become just another name in someone else's reports. I walked from her chambers on legs that felt mechanical. Guardian. I moved like a guardian now, I realized. Steady, efficient, emotionless, not because the emotions were gone, but because I'd learned to function despite them, to partition them away into some sealed corner where they couldn't interfere with the work. My new team waited in sub-level Delta, 20 Guardians in grey carapace, masks hiding whatever remained of their original faces, a tech priest to handle psychic interrogations, administrative staff to process documentation and maintain detention schedules, 47 cells waiting to be filled. 47. The number I'd started with before I stopped counting. I wanted to laugh, wanted to scream, wanted to run to the highest point of the hive and throw myself into the industrial smoke, let it dissolve me the way it dissolved the unnamed, thousands who'd been processed and rendered and recycled into the Imperium's endless hunger. Instead, I reviewed the first batch of investigation targets my predecessor had flagged before his own processing 3 weeks prior. 17 names, 17 people who deviated from expected behavioral parameters by tiny, almost undetectable amounts. whose efficiency ratings had fluctuated, or whose devotional observances showed minor inconsistencies, or who'd simply existed long enough in positions of minor authority that their potential for corruption had grown too large to ignore. I marked all 17 for immediate detention and interrogation. This is where the story should end, with my complete transformation into the thing I'd feared, with the cycle perpetuating through me like I was just another link in an infinite chain. But the truth is darker than simple corruption or moral collapse. The truth is that I became good at it. Over the next 2 years, I processed 3,416 detainees. I identified 17 major corruption networks, exposed 8 infiltration attempts by hostile organizations, rooted out corruption among 3 separate administrative divisions. My efficiency ratings exceeded expectations by 18%. I was commended by the Lord Inquisitor himself, granted additional resources, expanded authority. I saved lives. That's the obscene part. By identifying genuine threats, the ones who actually intended sabotage or genuine heresy or collaboration with humanity's enemies, I prevented attacks that would have killed thousands. My thoroughness meant real conspiracies were exposed before they could metastasize. My rigor protected the Imperium from enemies who would have happily seen entire hive cities burn. And in the process, I destroyed hundreds who were guilty of nothing except being flagged by a system designed to find guilt everywhere. I tortured innocent people to extract confessions of non-existent crimes. I marked families for purging based on statistical anomalies and administrative requirements. I became the instrument of oppression I'd once feared, all while telling myself I was doing necessary work. The ratio was my justification. For every genuine threat I eliminated, perhaps 20 innocents were swept up in the investigation. 20-1. Terrible odds, but better than allowing the genuine threats to operate unchecked. Better than the alternative of doing nothing while actual corruption metastasized. I told myself this, told myself the math made it necessary. Told myself I was choosing the lesser evil because someone had to make impossible choices in an impossible system. I stopped being able to sleep without chemical assistance at month 7, stopped being able to eat without suppressants at month 14, started requiring psychological conditioning to maintain emotional stability at month 19. The same conditioning they gave Guardians, just less extreme. Just enough to let me function without the weight of what I'd done crushing me into complete breakdown. At year 2, the Inquisitor summoned me again. Same viewport, same watching smoke, same colorless eyes. "You've done exceptional work, Interrogator Vess," she said. "Your efficiency is remarkable. Your thoroughness exemplary. You've exceeded every expectation. Thank you, ma'am. But you're breaking. Not a question, a statement. I can see it in your medical reports, your conditioning requirements, the way you move. You're maintaining functionality through chemical support and psychological reinforcement, but the core, the essential self that makes you effective, is eroding." I said nothing. There was nothing to say. "This is expected," the Inquisitor continued. "Few last more than 5 years in active interrogation roles. The work requires perfect rigor, applied to inherently imperfect situations. It demands absolute certainty in service to a mission that guarantees eventual failure. The human mind wasn't designed to sustain such contradictions. Eventually, it breaks." She turned from the viewport. "You have a choice, Interrogator. Accept conversion to Guardian status. Preserve your loyalty and expertise in a form that can continue indefinitely without psychological degradation. Or accept retirement to a support role, training new interrogators, maintaining efficiency but no longer directly participating in active investigations." Neither was really a choice. Both were deaths. One preserved the meat that used to be me as an instrument emptied of personality. The other preserved the personality as a teacher, training more people to become what I'd become, perpetuating the cycle through others. "There's a third option," the Inquisitor said quietly. one I'm authorized to offer to those who've demonstrated sufficient understanding and commitment, elevation to Inquisitor status, full autonomy, authority to set your own investigation parameters, to exercise judgment in application of our standards, to become not merely an instrument, but an architect of the system itself. She let that sink in. But this comes with complete knowledge, with access to information about the true nature of our mission, the actual threats we face, the real reasons our methods must be so extreme, knowledge that makes the choice fully informed and fully damning. Most who receive this knowledge break immediately, cannot reconcile what they learn with what they've done. But a few, a very few, prove capable of bearing the weight. What knowledge? My voice sounded strange, distant, the truth. The Inquisitor's smile was terrible. That everything I've told you is a lie, that corruption isn't infinite, that most investigations are manufactured, that the system isn't protecting humanity from external threats, but from itself, from the dangerous possibility that humans might question whether eternal oppression is necessary. We create the very threats we claim to fight against, because without threats, without eternal vigilance against infinite enemies, the Imperium would collapse. People would ask why they accept such suffering, would demand better, would stop participating in their own oppression. The room tilted. I gripped the edge of her desk, feeling reality fracture. We are the enemy, Interrogator Vess. We are the corruption we claim to root out. Every genuine threat we eliminate is vastly outnumbered by the innocence we process to maintain the atmosphere of fear that keeps this broken system functioning. And we do this knowingly, deliberately. Because the alternative, allowing hope, allowing questions, allowing any suggestion that things could be different, would topple an Imperium so rotten that only terror holds it together. She leaned closer. So choose. Become a guardian and lose yourself. Become a trainer and perpetuate the lie unknowingly. Or become an inquisitor and perpetuate it with full knowledge. Accept that everything you've done served no higher purpose than maintaining a system designed to crush the very people it claims to protect. Accept that you can't undo your crimes, can't save those you've damned, can't escape your complicity in evil so vast it has become indistinguishable from order itself. I stood in that chamber breathing sweet smoke from the vents, and understood finally why the Guardians were more feared than any external enemy. Because the enemy was honest. The enemy wanted to destroy you and made no pretense otherwise. But the Guardians, the Inquisition, wore the mask of protection while conducting the same destruction, made you participate in your own oppression, made you complicit in atrocities committed in your own name for your own supposed safety, made you choose between dying as yourself or living as the instrument of your own damnation. My throat was dust. I need time, no. The Inquisitor's voice was iron. The choice must be immediate. Knowledge of this truth without commitment to serve regardless is the only unforgivable crime. Decide now, Interrogator Vess, Guardian, Trainer, or Inquisitor. There are no other options. I looked at her colorless eyes and saw my own future reflected there, saw what I would become if I chose elevation, saw that she too had stood where I stood, faced the same choice, chosen the same damnation, saw that this was the real test, not whether I could break others, but whether I could continue breaking them after understanding it served nothing except perpetuating endless suffering. I thought of Morlan counting his dead, of Hess protecting 15,000 people from a system designed to erase them, of the 3,416 people I'd processed, how many had been guilty of nothing except being targets in someone's investigation. I thought of the 17 genuine threats I'd eliminated, The lives I'd saved by identifying real conspiracies, the terrible arithmetic that justified participating in atrocity by pointing to tiny fractions of legitimate good. Inquisitor, I heard myself say, I choose elevation. The words tasted like ash, like betrayal, like the sweet smoke of the dead. The Inquisitor smiled and offered me her seal of office. I took it with hands that no longer shook because I no longer had the capacity for human reaction. Had become something else entirely, not guardian, but worse. A conscious architect of oppression who understood exactly what she was doing and chose it anyway. Welcome to truth, Inquisitivess, she said. Now the real work begins. I wear the red-trimmed robes now. I stand at viewports watching smoke rise from districts I've marked for investigation. I train new interrogators, teaching them to be thorough and rigorous and merciless. I identify targets and launch investigations that will doom hundreds to save handfuls. I write reports justifying methods I know are designed not to protect but to oppress. And I count, still count. Can't stop counting. 7,342 now. 7,342 people I've processed or ordered processed since accepting elevation. The number grows daily. Will grow until my own inevitable processing, because everyone fails eventually, even Inquisitors who understand the system's true purpose. But here's what they didn't tell me. What I've learned through 2 more years of service. Some of us fail slower than others. Some of us develop the capacity to hold contradictions without breaking, to commit atrocities while preserving enough self to recognize them as atrocities, to become monsters who remember being human. And in that remembering lies the only resistance available. Not rebellion. Rebellion gets you processed. Not escape. Escape gets you hunted. But simply refusing to forget, maintaining the count, carrying the weight of every name, every face, every scream extracted in service to a system that devours its own people while claiming to protect them. They want us to stop counting, to accept the infinity of the work and surrender to it, to become perfect instruments devoid of conscience or memory. But I count 7,342, and tomorrow it will be more, and the day after more still. And I will remember every single one until my own processing finally grants me the mercy of oblivion. This is why the Emperor's Guardians are more feared than the enemy. Not because they're stronger or more brutal or more numerous, but because they're us. They're what we become when we participate in systems of oppression, when we make compromises in service to survival, when we tell ourselves that maintaining order, any order, no matter how cruel, is better than the chaos of questioning it. They're what I became, what I remain, what I'll continue being until someone else counts me as their 7,343rd. And the cycle perpetuates, infinite and merciless, because that's what they designed it to do. I am Inquisitivess. I serve the Inquisition. I protect humanity by destroying it. I am the monster that wears the mask of savior. I am the enemy, and I'm still counting.